On my first listen, this album didn't work for me, Mark Knopfler's Golden Heart, so why now, 4 years later, is there a change of heart? Change of heart, perhaps a bit of a pun in there somewhere. Welcome back to Toby Jones Talks Music. Today we are going to be talking about Mark Knopfler, his first solo studio album, Golden Heart, and why it is working for me now in 2026, when it didn't really work for me back in 2022. This is another edition of one of those episodes that I will call Appreciating the Music That I Already Have. Albums that I've listened to once, twice, as many times as I have in the past, and not really had much of an interest in them, much of a love for them. But when I've gone and revisited them again this year, again, whether it's only once, and gleaned something from it, or like this album, revisited it several times this year, and gone down a bit of a rabbit hole with it, and really started to enjoy it far more than I have on previous listens. So sit back and I'll tell you all about Mark Knopfler's Golden Heart and my personal relationship with that album. Now, me revisiting this album coincided with one of two things. It was only about a month ago and I can't really remember, but that doesn't matter too much. One of those things was a podcast with another Mark K, not Mark Knopfler, but indeed Mark Kermode. I'm a big fan of Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo's show, Kermode and Mayo's Take, all about film reviews and some TV reviews in there. I listen to that show every week, and I went down a bit of a Mark Kermode rabbit hole looking on YouTube at other content, other stuff he'd been on, and one of the podcasts that he'd been on very recently was a podcast called All About the Music with Neil Brand, and one of the segments in that podcast that I found quite interesting is when they talked about Mark Knopfler's Local Hero soundtrack, and I watched that film some time ago, and I have to say that film didn't gel with me whatsoever. I didn't really enjoy it at all. I found it quite a chore to watch. One of the main reasons why I did watch it was knowing that Mark Knopfler did the soundtrack for it, and I've always liked the Local Hero song, albeit I've probably heard that a little bit too much, being a football fan and listening to it start Newcastle United games, thinking, oh god, here we go again. But the instrumental part before the big da, 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 I like that. And they were talking about the Wild theme, which I think they said in that podcast is like Local Hero, but in a different key. I think it's a key down from what Local Hero's in, I think. And I've enjoyed listening to that, the Wild theme, although I haven't really listened to the whole instrumental soundtrack to Local Hero. That's not really not my style. But coinciding with that, I've actually also been enjoying other film soundtracks recently, more as a whole. Not so much the dramatic tracks or indeed as entire works, but opening titles, end credits, the likes of Doe Eyes from The Bridges of Madison County, Clint Eastwood, Blue Morgan, the end credits from $1 Million Baby again, Clint Eastwood. And as I've been watching a few films recently, I've been paying more attention to the end credits, the opening title. Films like The Cider House Rules that I watched recently have got really nice opening titles, end credits that I've added to my personal playlist, and I'm finding I'm enjoying that more at the moment. Music as a background, gentle, without being in your face. This previously, and I've said it many times before, and you've got to start to think of the integrity of this, but it doesn't really matter too much because this is what I'm enjoying at the moment. This previously has been a rock-centric channel, but I find myself drifting away from that, aiming to slow down, take things a little bit easier, and that's where Mark Knopfler's first solo studio album came, outside of film soundtracks from 1996. Now, previously, my previous experience with this album is from the Mark Knopfler box set, the studio albums 1996 to 2007. Now, I was bought this as a Christmas present a few years ago. I think it was probably 2021 when it came out. And I purely had this just as something to have for Christmas. You know, when someone asks, what do you want for Christmas? And I saw that advertised, I thought that could be quite interesting for me to get into. But in the 4 odd years I've had it, I've listened to this and not got any further. You know, isn't that a travesty? Even with Dire Straits, I think the year previous they had this box set, the studio album 78 to 91. And to be honest, I haven't really gone all that deep into the Dire Straits albums. I know a fair amount of Dire Straits stuff, but being completely honest and open here, I don't know every album back to front. The one album that I do know back to front is Love Over Gold, which I think is absolutely brilliant. But the key thing about Knopfler's music that I've heard all of Golden Heart, and I've heard little bits, little segments from what has come afterwards. I've heard Sailing to Philadelphia from the next album. I've heard Why I Man from the Ragpicker's Dream album, and Another song which I'll talk about is Ahead of the Game from One Deep River, Mark's last album. But the nice thing about Mark Knopfler's music that particularly I've picked up on this occasion is that actually this music still retains the main elements of what I love about Dire Straits. And although this might sound a little bit daft in itself because Dire Straits is Mark Knopfler's band, the main thing that I really like about Dire Straits is Mark Knopfler himself. The one thing that you might not think, you go to his guitar riffs, the guitar licks first off, don't you? But one thing I really like about Dire Straits is Mark Knopfler's voice. And that voice is a little bit gentler on this Golden Heart album, something that I really like. But looking at the guitar solos from Dire Straits on my favourite album, Love Over Gold, the solos on Telegraph Road, It Never Rains, longer songs, that album's more of a progressive work. The solos take time to come, but when they do come, they really deliver, and I really like those solos. Looking at Communique, the second album from Dire Straits, the solo of the final one of Where Do You Think You're Going, I love that. Maybe one that people don't pick out so much, but it's always one that gets me wanting to move, really exciting. The vibe of News, Once Upon a Time in the West. I find Golden Heart delivers something more akin to that, where the music takes time to breathe, and this represents a slowing down both in Mark Knopfler's musical career. He said that there was a dehumanising scale on what had been taking place in Dire Straits, the big tours, and he really wanted an end to that. But this slowing down in terms of the songs taking their time to breathe. Think of Brothers in Arms, the title track from that album. That song takes its time to breathe. That's a lovely piece of work. Maybe one of my favourite songs, period. Really excellent song. But if you think about that Brothers in Arms album, actually, apart from maybe Money for Nothing and Walk of Life, the more upbeat songs, So Far Away, Why Worry, have got that element of taking their time to breathe. So Mark Knopfler's always had this in him and stored within the Dire Straits albums, but these are different enough, these songs from Golden Heart. They're different enough from Dire Straits, a slower, gentler sound, but it's still close enough to Dire Straits to be recognised as Mark Knopfler's work. And Mark Knopfler's been delivering this for nearly 50 years now. That first Dire Straits album in 1978, his last album, solo album, I think was 2024, One Deep River. And one of the songs I really like on that is Ahead of the Game, and that is the whole catchy riff, the da 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 da. I really like that. He's still doing that 30 years on from his first solo record, Golden Heart, but nearly 50 years on from his first Dire Straits album. So why am I enjoying this now? Why has it hit more this time? Well, I've talked about this previously, of taking time with an album. The first time I listened to this, had I probably only listened to it once back in 2022 when I first heard it. Listened to it once, I'm not really that interested. It's a long album, so it takes that commitment to be willing to listen to it, and I think that's something that with longer albums I've kind of shirked away from in the past. I've actually heard this, and this is in no connection to the Knopfler box set. I bought the Privateering album from a record fair a few years ago, in my age of pretty much buying anything that I saw, and this has got, I think it's got 20 tracks on it, and you know what, I listened to this once, I can't remember anything off it now. And it's that whole journey that I want to go on of rediscovering things that I've got in my collection, not necessarily buying new things and wants to listen to new things. There's a bit of that, sure there is, that discovery, but that rediscovery is probably more rewarding actually than what new music brings as something that you've just bought. After all, I guess rediscovering something maybe is new music still in itself. But this album, Golden Heart, is more of a background album, akin to those soundtracks that I've been talking about earlier. Something that is good to listen to, for instance, when I'm doing a jigsaw, as part of that slowing down and being more intentional about things and not being on screens, not doing what you're doing at the moment, watching YouTube. So I won't discourage you. You keep watching, because that needs a screen. You can't watch without a screen, unless I do a live show where you don't have to have a screen. There's a potential for that, but I'm taking real intention and making sure that I do spend time away from screens and doing something like a jigsaw, something in the background, whether that being a podcast like Kermode and Mayo's Take every week or listening to music. This album has a few good qualities. A, the fact that it's a long album, so I don't have to pick something different very quickly. I don't have to go, well, this is half an hour, and then, what do I want to listen to next? This being around about an hour and 10 is actually good for a perfect session for possibly doing a jigsaw, or maybe even listen to it twice if you want to go around again and do something for a couple of hours. But what it also is because it's not in your face, it's present enough in the background to still be interesting. It's not like a soundtrack album, an instrumental soundtrack that just bumbles along, but it's still there in the background, interesting enough, delivering those guitar solos from Knopfler. Yeah, I really like that sound. But it doesn't just bumble along. And I appreciate that this won't work for me, it won't work for you, in every vibe, every mood. This album wouldn't work for me if I want to be energised. But isn't that the whole point of music? You pick what works for you at a certain time. I think heavier music probably works better for me when I'm stressed, possibly when I'm energised, looking for that energy of heavier music. I guess when I'm stressed I might find softer music being better to more calm myself down. Probably more when I'm angry I go for the heavier stuff possibly. But this has really worked for me in a time of trying to slow down. Again, listening to this album more intentionally, giving it at least 3, 4, 5 different spins. And I've really discovered a lot more from this album than I had done before. So it's been a really good experience listening to Golden Heart again. And something that I really want to do is go and listen to all of these from the Mark Knopfler studio albums. There's no point having it without listening to them. But what's quite nice about this, doing things more intentionally, listen to this over a period of a few weeks, is that I'm not chasing that instant gratification. You will hear me talking a lot about that, because that's something that I'd say maybe I don't know if I'm concerned about that whole dopamine hit of having something straight away, both in terms of the album, taking time with the album, but also the songs taking time to breathe as well. These don't hit straight away, and sometimes you're in a mood for, to have that 2-3 minute song that hits straight away. It all depends what kind of mood you're in and what kind of vibe you're in. My vibe at the moment is very much with gentler things that take their time to breathe, and that's why I'm enjoying Golden Heart at the moment. But the other nice thing about it is that the anticipation of going to listen to the next album, it's something that you enjoy far more. It becomes far more of an event rather than, right, I've listened to Golden Heart, I've ticked that one off, I don't really know a lot about it, but let's move on to the next one. Well, I'm not moving on to the next one now until I take my time to enjoy this far more. But what I haven't done yet, apart from talking a bit about the nuances of the general sound of this record, is talking about this album overall, because this is, again, a long album. There's 14 songs on this album. A lot of them, particularly the last songs on this album, being 5-6 minutes long each. So it's very much an album that takes its time. I have been a little bit irked by longer albums in the past, some longer albums, because I find they can be front-loaded and lose their momentum, which is something I would actually say about this when I listened to it the first time round. But listening to it this time round, I found far more joy in the second half of this record, because I'm almost discovering rap for the first time. But looking at the start of this record, Darling Pretty is the first song. I've liked that song from the first time I ever heard it. I feel like this is the most show-off-ish song, if you will, from this record. More of a full, louder band arrangement, but there's some glorious riffage going on from Mark here, particularly that last solo in that track. Really, really good. But the second half of this record, it's track 7, so it's nearly there. And the Sweet Charming, A Night in Summer Long Ago, that's a really lovely song. You've got I'm the Fool, track number 9. There's no big guitar solo at the end. There's no massive crescendo. You might be waiting for that to come and it doesn't, and you might think, oh, what was the point of that? But this fades out for around 40 seconds, maintaining the whole vibe, the same vibe as the whole song. There's no sudden key change. There's no massive gratification that comes from this, but it's just gentle, nice music. And I guess you know what to expect from it, which is another nice part of it. There's nothing that's going to stress you out. There's nothing that's coming out that's going to really surprise you. Nobody's Got the Gun, track number 12. There's some great slow chords, if you will, on this one, and I think Mark Knopfler's vocal is particularly good on this one. We can pick out the fact, yep, there's a good riff there, yep, there's a good solo there, but again, one of the other things that I really like that you can't get from anywhere else is Mark Knopfler's voice. Mark Knopfler's guitar sound is unique, different to anybody else, but of course his voice is the most endearing part. That is totally different to anybody else, at least that I've heard. Again, Nobody's Got the Gun has got a very, very long instrumental ending, but you can just kind of let your mind go with the music. No vocal to distract, and the musician's in no rush. It's more of a jamming session. It fades out with 30 seconds to go slowly. You can hear that fade with 30 seconds to go, and you're thinking, God, this is a long fade. But again, it's that whole gentle vibe, mood with this music that I really like. The last song, Are We in Trouble Now? Bit of a side note here. Hargus Pig Robbins plays piano on this song. He plays on Behind Closed Doors, which is one of my favourite country music albums, and his piano actually is one of the great qualities of that album. And I hear that piano in this song, and yeah, that really resonates. I don't know if this is the only song to have a piano on, but that really resonates with me. Again, this song follows the same structure, a similar one anyway, to Nobody's Got the Gun, where it tells the story, and then Knopfler's great guitar solos kick in, what he does best. It almost feels like, right, let's tell a story with these songs and then just give the paying audience what they want to hear, Mark. That's the best part about this record. And I think that final solo might actually be my favourite on the album overall. But it's not just all moody, slower music. It's not just the same. And I take issue with records sometimes that are just the same. If it's a brilliant sound throughout, then great. But you've got to have that variety. So there's more joyful sounds on the likes of track number 10, Je suis désolé. There's sprinklings of attitude even earlier on in the album with the lyrics of No Can Do, track number 4, Don't You Get It, track number 6. Even Cannibals, track number 8. But it doesn't take away from the vibe of the record overall. It does create some variety. Now, I prefer the slower, gentler sounds, but these songs are fine. And it does mean that the album isn't just the same all throughout. So coming back to the start, that whole question of why is Golden Heart working for me at the moment where it didn't work for me previously. Well, I think that a lot of the time it is the way that you approach music, the way that I have approached music, and the time that it's come to hit me. It's hit me at a time when I want to slow down. I want to enjoy more tranquil, calm sounds from my music. Perhaps that's why it didn't work for me the first time round. It's not in your face. It doesn't deliver something quickly. I'm thinking, right, come on. I've got loads of different albums back there. If this isn't going to deliver for me quickly, I'm going to move on to the next thing. But now I'm almost on the mindset, well, what's the rush? What's the rush of that if you're not going to enjoy what's there? It's perfect as background. It's not in your face. But it also carries on some of the great elements from Dire Straits. It's not that much different that you can't really see the link between this and Dire Straits music. Mark Knopfler's voice, Mark Knopfler's guitars were probably the most endearing parts of Dire Straits for me, and that's not lost here. The same way, I guess, that if you look at Mark's friend Phil Lynott and the way that he maintained the charm in his solo career. Look at Solo in Soho, and there is a connection here because, of course, Mark Knopfler played on that album on the great King's Call song. The music isn't the same as it was in Thin Lizzy, but it still has that same quality of Phil being there. And those two, Phil and Mark, talk about two legends. I had a photo of those two as my iPad wallpaper at one point. A great picture. I think probably performing King's Call live on a show or something. I can't actually find that picture now, searching on Google, but what a great picture of the two of those. But what I'll end on is the fact that this isn't a 10 out of 10 album. Not that it will ever be, you know. It's not one of those, I can't see myself listening to this for the next 6 months. But in the time that I have listened to it, it's served a purpose. It's been really nice background music. I have my favourite songs from it, which will possibly go into a playlist that I'll revisit more and more. As a whole work, no, it won't be one that'll be my regular rotation all the time, but it's working for me at the moment in terms of being an album that I can go back to and enjoy that slower sound. It's a bit like a film, isn't it? If you want to talk about film rather than music as another art form. Films sometimes I find more pleasurable are those that you know what you're going to get. They're not 10 out of 10 films, they're not outstanding box office, big pictures, but it's something that's charming, endearing, connects to you as a viewer. That's what makes us all different. That's what has our different tastes. As long as you enjoy it, that's the most important thing. And it works for you in that moment, that period. And I've heard people talking about music that works for them in times of grief, in times of happiness. All those different times, different music works for them. And that's why Golden Heart is working for me at the moment, or at least has worked for me in the next couple of weeks. But I felt for my musical journey, and this is why I love doing this channel so much, that I wanted to talk about that before I moved on. It's almost that idea of getting a little bit of closure from things. before I move on to sailing to Philadelphia, saying my piece while the time's there, and then moving on to that next album. So that is why Mark Knopfler's Golden Heart is working for me at the moment. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on Golden Heart, Mark Knopfler's solo career, Dire Straits, whatever it might be connected to Mark Knopfler, even if it's Thin Lizzy, because I talked about Phil a little bit there. Let's get a conversation going down in the comments, and I hope you've enjoyed this little ramble about how Golden Heart is working for me at the moment. But you know what? I'm very excited to move on now to that next album of Sailing to Philadelphia. We are available as a podcast form if you're not able to listen to the videos or indeed watch the videos on YouTube. So we're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as an audio and video offering, but we're also available on all good podcast sites, and we're also available on social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, X and TikTok. So you will get notifications on 3 of those sites, not TikTok necessarily, of when videos are being released. So if you can subscribe, that would be absolutely fantastic. Ring the bell as well when you subscribe to get notified of when videos are released. If you like, comment, share, any form of engagement is all good for the algorithm. And the last thing I'll say is that if you haven't listened to this for a while, in fact anything that you haven't listened to for a while, whether it's Knopfler, whether it's anything else, something that you've got a small inkling that you didn't necessarily enjoy that much first time round, go and revisit it, and you might be surprised. There'll be a video up there if you want to continue your journey here with Toby Jones Talks Music, and indeed you can subscribe down in this corner here. But all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, thank you for joining me, thank you for taking your time to join me today, and hopefully I'll see you again for another video sometime soon. Take care.